She was not supposed to matter. That was the rule. The unspoken law of Kang Min-Jae's world. A world built on silence, on fear, on the kind of power that made generals bow their heads and senators forget their own names. In that world, maids were furniture. Staff were shadows. They existed to serve and disappear. Amara Osei was supposed to be a shadow, but shadows don't bleed like that. Kang Min-Jae stood at the threshold of the servants' corridor on the 3rd floor of his Seoul estate, and what he saw made something cold and ancient inside him crack. Not shatter, not yet, but crack, the way ice cracks before the whole frozen lake gives way beneath your feet. She was on the floor, curled against the marble baseboard, her dark skin ashen, her breathing shallow and wrong, her uniform soaked through with something he refused to name until he was close enough that he couldn't lie to himself anymore. Blood. He had seen blood before, oceans of it, rivers, rooms painted red by his own orders. But standing over Amara Osei, watching her chest rise and fall in tiny, desperate increments, Kang Min-Jae felt something he had not felt in 11 years. He felt afraid. He crouched down, his tailored suit creased at the knees. His hand, the hand that had signed death warrants, that had broken bones, that had never once trembled, hovered 2 centimeters above her cheek. Her eyes fluttered open. And in that brief, terrible moment between consciousness and darkness, Amara Osei looked directly at the most feared man in South Korea. And she smiled, not a grateful smile, not a frightened smile, a knowing one, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment, as if she had always known that the only person who would find her, the only person in this massive, hollow, fortified estate, would be him. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Her pulse was there, faint, thready, running, scared. He straightened and pulled out his phone. He called no ambulance. He called his personal physician instead, the one bound to him by secrets far darker than any Hippocratic oath. Dr. Yoon, 3rd floor East Corridor, now, and if anyone else in this house learns she was found here, you will not have a practice by morning. He hung up, knelt again, and this time, he did what no one in his entire organization had ever seen him do. He gathered Amara Osei into his arms himself. He carried her. Not a bodyguard, not a footman. Him. The king of the Korean underworld. The man they called Gyeomun Saja, the Black Reaper. He carried a maid down the corridor like she weighed nothing, and like she was everything, and he didn't understand, not yet, why his hands were so careful, when they'd been so careless with every human life before this one. Amara Osei had arrived at the Kang estate 14 months ago. She had come from Accra, not from poverty, which would have been simple to understand, but from ruin. The kind of ruin that comes after wealth, after comfort, after a father who built a business empire over 40 years and then watched a single betrayal collapse it in 40 days. Joseph Osei had been a brilliant man, an honest one. And in the end, those 2 qualities had been exactly what destroyed him. The business partner who robbed him, Kwame Asante, a man Joseph had trusted since university, had left the Osei family with nothing but debts and a reputation too battered to rebuild in Ghana. So Amara, the eldest of 3, the one her father always called his sharp one, had made the decision that none of them wanted her to make. She would go abroad. She would work. She would send money home until her family could breathe again. Amara, you didn't come this far in life to clean someone else's house. Her mother had wept at the airport. I came this far in life to take care of my family, Amara had said. Everything else is just a detour. She had a degree in literature from the University of Ghana. She spoke 4 languages, English, Twi, French, and now conversational Korean, learned through online courses before leaving Ghana, then studied intensively during the 6 weeks between her arrival in Seoul and her placement at the Kang estate through a domestic agency that specialized in foreign staff for ultra-high net worth households. They had told her nothing specific about the household. Standard discretion policy. What she found when she arrived was a mansion the size of a small village, guarded like a military installation, staffed by 14 people who moved through its halls, with the silence of people who had learned that noise attracted attention. And attention at the Kang estate was rarely good. She found out on her third day, from the housekeeper, Mrs. Jung, who delivered the information the way one delivers a terminal diagnosis, gently, clearly, and without any suggestion that the news might change, that her employer was not merely wealthy. He was Kang Min-Jae, and Kang Min-Jae was not merely powerful. He was the kind of powerful that governments borrowed from and feared in equal measure. The kind of powerful that made the word untouchable feel like an understatement. The other maids kept their eyes down. Amara kept hers level. This was the first problem. The second problem happened on her 11th day, when she walked into the East Library to dust the shelves and found Kang Min-Jae standing at the window, looking out at the rain. A glass of something amber in his hand and a stillness about him that was more unnerving than anger. She didn't back out of the room the way she was supposed to. She said, "I'll come back later if you prefer." He turned, and the thing that made her breath catch was not his face, though his face was extraordinarily handsome in that cold, carved way of someone who has never once allowed themselves to be soft, but his eyes, dark, still, like deep water that had forgotten how to reflect light. He looked at her the way he had presumably never looked at a maid before. He looked at her like she was unexpected. "You speak Korean?" "Conversationally," she said. "I'm still learning." "You weren't afraid to interrupt me." "I knocked," she said. "You didn't answer. I assumed the room was empty." A pause. He turned back to the window. "Dust the shelves," he said. "I don't mind." She should have left it there. Every sensible instinct said, dust the shelves, say nothing, disappear back into the furniture. But Amara Osei had never been particularly sensible when it came to the things that interested her. And Kang Min-Jae, she realized with a deep unease she couldn't fully name, was the most interesting thing in the room. The thing about a man like Kang Min-Jae is that everyone around him was performing. His subordinates performed loyalty. His associates performed respect. The women who attended his formal dinners performed admiration and availability. Even his personal bodyguard, the enormous and silent Kim Tae-yang, performed a kind of professional blankness that Kang Min-Jae had long since learned to see through. Amara performed nothing. This was not a strategy. It was simply who she was. She was too tired for performance, too homesick for pretense, too tightly wound inside her own grief and duty to manufacture something she didn't feel. When she was cheerful, it was because something was genuinely funny. When she was quiet, it was because she was thinking. When she said good morning to Kang Min-Jae in the East Corridor at 7 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, she said it because the morning was there, and so was he. And it seemed like the right thing to say. It took him 4 months to notice that none of the other staff said good morning to him. He noticed because one Thursday he was walking the corridor and she wasn't there. She had a cold, mild enough that Mrs. Young let her rest until 10, and the corridor felt wrong in a way he couldn't articulate until he was sitting at his desk an hour later and realized it was quiet. Too quiet. The aggressive, purposeful quiet of a space that had never learned how to simply be at peace. He began, without fully understanding why, to arrange himself near the library on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself this with the confident fluency of a man who had lied to everyone in his life for so long that the lies had become a kind of mother tongue. Amara, for her part, began to understand what the estate actually was. Not through anyone telling her, but through the quiet accumulation of details. The men who came and left at strange hours, the rooms that no one entered, the way the estate's head of security, a hawk-faced man named Choi Sung-hyun, watched her with a particular kind of attention that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with assessment. She understood. She said nothing. She was here to work, to send money home, to survive. "You're different from the others," Kang Min-Jae said one Tuesday, approximately 7 months into her employment. He was sitting, unusually, in one of the library's armchairs, rather than standing at the window, like he'd decided something. "Different how?" she asked, not looking up from the shelf she was reorganizing. "You're not afraid of me." "Of course I am," she said. "I'm just not afraid of you more than I'm afraid of other things." He was quiet for a long moment. "What are you more afraid of?" She put down the book she was holding and looked at him directly. Something the other staff never did, had stopped doing so long ago that it had become a matter of instinct rather than instruction. "Failing my family," she said simply. "Compared to that, you're just a man." The thing that crossed his face then, not anger, not amusement, but something raw and almost bewildered, like a man who has just been handed a mirror for the first time in years, made her chest tighten. And later, alone in her small room at the end of the service wing, Amara Osei said 3 words to herself very quietly and very firmly. "Do not fall." She meant it. She really did. If this story is hitting different already, drop a comment right now. Type, "I felt that," if you know exactly what Amara means. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it before this story ends, because what's coming next will destroy you in the best possible way. His name was Park Dae-jung, and he smiled too much. Amara noticed him the first time he came to the estate for a business dinner. Noticed not his face, which was handsome in an over-constructed way, but his hands, the way they moved when he talked. Too expressive, too deliberate, like a man who had learned charm as a skill rather than inherited it as a quality. He was Kang Min-Jae's oldest associate, his second in command, the man who managed the legitimate business front, the Kang Holdings empire of hotels, tech investments, and property development, while Kang Min-Jae managed the architecture of power that sat behind it. He was also, Amara would learn, the most dangerous person in the building. Not because he was violent, though he was when necessary, but because he was patient. Carefully, strategically, beautifully patient. The kind of patient that only comes in people who have been waiting a very long time for something they believe is rightfully theirs. On his 3rd visit to the estate, Park Dae-jung stopped Amara in the East Corridor, the one she cleaned every Tuesday and Thursday, the one where Kang Min-Jae made a point of being at 7 a.m., and he said to her, smiling his too much smile, "You're new." She said, "I've been here 8 months." And the smile widened, and something behind it shifted, and she thought, "This man already knows exactly who I am and exactly how long I've been here. This isn't curiosity. This is reconnaissance." "Min-Jae speaks well of you," Park Dae-jung said. "I don't think Mr. Kang speaks of the staff at all," Amara replied carefully. "You'd be surprised," he said, "what he speaks of when he thinks no one is listening." She held his gaze, said nothing, excused herself politely, and walked away. That evening, she sat on her bed and thought about it for a long time. She had survived her family's ruin. She had survived the humiliation of packing her university degrees into a box and boarding a flight to clean someone else's house. She had survived 9 months of grief, of homesickness, of wiring money every month to a family that needed it while keeping just enough for herself to exist on. She had not survived all of that to be some piece in someone else's game. The game revealed itself 3 weeks later. She came in early, earlier than she was meant to, because Mrs. Young had asked her to rearrange the East Library before a morning meeting, and heard voices through the slightly open door. Park Dae-jung's voice first, low, careful, almost gentle in its precision. "You're distracted, Hyung. The Busan deal almost fell apart because you weren't focused. The men notice." A pause. Then Kang Min-Jae's voice, flatter, quieter, the voice she recognized as the one he used when he was controlling something intensely. "The Busan deal closed. Barely. You want to tell me why you're spending time in the East Library on Tuesday and Thursday mornings? Because it's not for the books, Min-Jae." Silence. "She's staff," Park Da-jung said, and now the gentleness had a blade in it. "She's foreign staff. You're the head of the Kang organization. Do you understand what that kind of exposure looks like? Do you understand what our enemies would do with it? You're overreading." "I'm protecting you," Park Dae-jung said, and his voice went soft with something that sounded almost loving. "The way I always have. The way I always will. But Min-Jae, she needs to go." Amara pressed her back against the corridor wall and breathed. She heard Kang Min-Jae's answer, and she could not have predicted what he said. Not in 1,000 years, not with everything she understood about him, could she have predicted it. He said, in a voice so quiet it barely existed, "No." And then, after a pause, "She stays. Don't touch her." And the silence that followed was the kind that meant the conversation was over. Not because agreement had been reached, but because one man had drawn a line in the earth and the other man, for now, had decided not to cross it. But Amara had watched enough of the world to know what "for now" meant. It meant the game was not over. It meant it had only just started, and she was already in the middle of it. It happened on a Wednesday. Not a Tuesday, not a Thursday, not one of the structured, accidental mornings they had developed without naming them. It happened at 11 p.m. when the estate was quiet and most of the staff had retired, and Amara was in the East Library returning a cart of books she'd cataloged that afternoon. He was already there, standing at the window again, but different this time. No glass of amber liquid, no tailored composure. His jacket was gone, his sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he was standing with both hands braced against the window frame, like a man holding himself up rather than simply standing. She set down the cart quietly. She should have left. Instead, she asked, in Korean, careful and soft, "Are you all right?" He didn't turn, but something in his posture shifted. The faintest, smallest release of something held too tightly for too long. "My brother died," he said. 11 years ago today." Amara stood still. "I'm sorry," she said. "He was 15. He didn't—" A pause. His hands tightened on the frame. He didn't deserve the family he was born into. She understood then, in the specific cellular way you understand something when it resonates against your own wound, that this was not a man who had chosen this life the way people choose careers or hobbies or places to live. This was a man who had been built into it, piece by piece, year by year, loss by loss, and at some point had looked around at the architecture of himself and understood that there was no going back to whatever he might have been before, that the person he might have been had died with his brother, quietly, 11 years ago. She walked to the window and stood beside him, not close enough to touch, just beside him, present, real. What was his name? A long pause. Junseo. "Tell me something about him," she said, "not how he died, something he loved." And then the most startling thing happened. Kang Min-Jae, the Black Reaper, the man who had not shown a genuine emotion to another human being in 11 years, talked, quietly, haltingly at first, then with increasing ease, like a door, long rusted, beginning to swing. He talked about a boy who had loved astronomy, who had made star charts by hand in a notebook with a blue cover, who had eaten too much tangerine candy and once convinced a 17-year-old Min-Jae to sneak out of their father's estate at midnight to lie in the garden and find the Orion constellation. He talked for 40 minutes. Amara listened to every word. "When did you last tell anyone about him?" she asked when he went quiet. Never, he said. Simply. Like a fact. Like breathing. She nodded. She didn't offer him comfort. Not the hollow kind, not the kind that papers over the wound and calls it healed. She simply stood there, and when she finally said goodnight and left the room, she did it quietly and without looking back. Kang Min-Jae stood at the window for another hour after she left. The estate was the same as it had always been, cold, beautiful, impenetrable. But something inside it had changed. Something inside him had changed. And in the morning, when he sat at his desk and tried to return to the business of being who he was, he found that the edges of himself, the iron edges, the ones he'd welded shut over years of violence and loss and discipline, had gone soft in a way he didn't know how to reverse. He told himself it was grief. The anniversary always did this. He told himself this with less conviction than usual. Are you still breathing? Because I barely am. Drop a comment. Type Junesio right now if this moment broke something in you. And share this video with one person who needs a story like this today. We're not even halfway through yet. Park Dae-jung was patient, but he was not idle. What Amara didn't know, what she couldn't have known because the information existed in layers of corporate and criminal architecture she had no access to, was that Park Dae-jung had been waiting for exactly 11 years for the moment when Kang Min-Jae would show a vulnerability. Every emperor has a weakness. Every fortress has a door. He had simply needed to find the right one. He found it in Amara. What Park Dae-jung understood with the cool, analytical clarity of a man who had spent over a decade studying his closest friend as both an ally and a contingency, was that Kang Min-Jae had never, not once in 11 years, shown a preference for any person, not a woman, not a friend, not a colleague. The closest he came to care was a kind of territorial protectiveness over the organization. That was manageable. That was predictable. But this woman who walked through the estate like she belonged to herself rather than to Kang Min-Jae's world, this was unpredictable. And unpredictable was dangerous. Not to Kang Min-Jae, to Park Dae-jung. Because Park Dae-jung had a plan, had always had a plan. The plan required Kang Min-Jae distracted, isolated, and, eventually, removed. Not killed. Killing Kang Min-Jae would be suicide, but discredited, cornered, forced out by the organization's inner council, who Park Dae-jung had spent years quietly, patiently cultivating. It was almost ready. 6 more months and the pieces would be in place. But a man in love, even a man barely admitting he might be approaching the edges of something like love, was harder to predict, harder to move. And Kang Min-Jae, with a real human anchor in the form of a Ghanaian literature graduate with level eyes and a spine made of something stronger than fear, was becoming dangerously harder to predict. So Park Dae-jung made a decision. He called a man named Oh Ji-hoon, a man who specialized in making problems disappear. The Ghanaian woman at the Kang estate, he said. I don't want her dead. I want her afraid. I want her gone. Afraid and gone costs more than dead, Oh Ji-hoon said. I know what it costs, Park Dae-jung said. Oh Ji-hoon's people were professional. They didn't break into the estate. They didn't need to. One of the kitchen staff was already on Park Dae-jung's payroll, a minor piece in a chess game Amara didn't know she was playing. It was the kitchen staff member who put the sedative in Amara's evening tea, a dosage calculated to be frightening rather than fatal. Intended to make her sick enough to be hospitalized, frightened enough to leave, but not sick enough to raise questions about foul play on estate grounds. What the kitchen staff member didn't know, what no one except Oh Ji-hoon knew, was that Oh Ji-hoon had received a secondary instruction from someone higher up in the organization than Park Dae-jung, someone who wanted Amara gone permanently, someone who had their own plans for Kang Min-Jae, someone who had put a full dose, not a warning dose, in that cup. Amara drank her evening tea. She returned to her room. She felt the dizziness at 8 p.m. and thought it was tiredness. She felt the nausea at 8:30 and thought it was the food. By 9 p.m., she was in the corridor trying to make it to Mrs. Jung's room to ask for help, and by 9:15, she was on the floor of the east corridor, her cheek against the cold marble, her phone knocked out of reach, her pulse fluttering weakly beneath her skin. And then she heard footsteps, slow, measured, the footsteps of a man who walks like he owns every surface he touches. And then there was warmth. Real, human, unexpected warmth, as hands that she recognized by some combination of memory and instinct gathered her up from the floor. She opened her eyes, and she smiled, not because she was relieved, though she was, not because she was safe, though she might be, but because even in the particular hell of that moment, there was something almost beautiful about the fact that it was him, that out of every person in this house, in this city, in this cold and complicated world, it was Kang Min-Jae who found her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known from the floor of the corridor, was that he hadn't found her by accident. He had come looking, because over the past week he had developed the habit of checking the east corridor before retiring for the night. No one knew about it, not even him. He told himself it was routine, but every night his steps carried him there. Dr. Yoon worked quietly and efficiently and without a single unnecessary word, the way he always did. He was 53 years old and had been Kang Min-Jae's private physician for 14 of those years. In that time, he had treated gunshot wounds, knife wounds, 2 cracked ribs, a fractured eye socket, all Kang Min-Jae's own, and an inventory of injuries belonging to associates that he had learned never to think about too carefully. He had treated one Maid. He had never, in 14 years, seen Kang Min-Jae stand in a doorway and watch him work with that particular expression, a tightness around the jaw, a stillness in the hands that looked less like control and more like prayer. "She'll need IV fluids and monitoring through the night," Dr. Yoon said, pulling off his gloves. "The compound in her system. It's not a natural illness. Someone drugged her." The room went very still. "How do you know?" Kang Min-Jae's voice was perfectly flat, the flat that preceded the kind of action that ended careers, freedoms, and sometimes lives. "Because her symptoms are consistent with a specific class of sedative compound, high dose, not something she could have ingested accidentally." He paused. "She's young and strong, and she was found quickly. She'll recover fully. But Min-Jae, someone in this house tried to kill this woman." Kang Min-Jae said nothing. He walked to the chair beside the bed where Amara lay, hooked to a drip and breathing steadily now. Still pale, still frighteningly still, but breathing. He sat down in the chair. He folded his hands in his lap. "Leave," he said to Dr. Yoon, not unkindly. "Send a nurse for the overnight monitoring. No one else enters this room." "Min-Jae, no one else," he said, "including Choi Sung-hyun." Dr. Yoon looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded and left. He sat there all night. This was the unexpected thing, not the phone calls he made at midnight. Quiet, controlled, devastating conversations with people who understood that when Kang Min-Jae called at midnight, someone's world was about to end. Not the investigation he set in motion within the hour, efficient and merciless and thorough. Not even the fact that by 3 a.m. he had identified the kitchen staff member and the chain that led upward to Oh Ji-hoon. The unexpected thing was that he stayed. He could have delegated the watching. He could have installed cameras, assigned bodyguards, returned to his own quarters. He had an organization to run. He had the Busan deal's second phase to review. He had enemies who would exploit any sign of distraction. He hated himself for staying, hated the weakness of it. 3 separate times he stood up, intending to leave, and 3 separate times he sat back down. He watched her breathe, and something happened in the deepest, most unexamined part of him. something that had no name in any of the languages he spoke, and he understood with the absolute clarity that only comes at 3 in the morning beside the bed of someone you almost lost, that he had been wrong. Wrong about what, exactly, took him until nearly 4 a.m. to articulate, sitting in the dark with the monitors beeping quietly and the soul night pressing against the windows. He had been wrong about the rule, the unspoken law of his world, the one that said people like Amara Osei were furniture, were shadows. Because furniture doesn't make you talk about your dead brother for 40 minutes at 11 p.m. Shadows don't make you say no to the most powerful person in your organization. And furniture definitely does not make you understand at 4 in the morning that you have spent 11 years building a fortress so impenetrable that you accidentally locked yourself inside it and forgot that you were supposed to be a person. At 4:15, Amara's eyes opened. They found him immediately in the dark, in the chair beside her bed, as if some part of her had always known exactly where he would be. And he didn't look away. He didn't reach for composure. He just looked at her. This man who had never once in 11 years let anyone see him clearly and let her see him, all of him, the real thing beneath the fortress, beneath the power, beneath 11 years of very careful, very lonely, very convincing performance. "You stayed," she said. Her voice was rough, barely there. "Yes," he said. "Why?" And for the first time in 11 years, Kang Min-Jae did not have a prepared answer, did not have a controlled answer, did not have any answer that came from the part of him that had learned to manage every word like a weapon. He had only the truth, raw and inconvenient and entirely unlike him. "Because you are not furniture," he said quietly, "and I am very sorry it took me this long to say it." The tears that slid down Amara's face were not from relief or from the residual effects of whatever had been put in her tea. They were from something far more complicated, from the specific exhaustion of being a person who has held themselves together very tightly for a very long time, and then suddenly, unexpectedly being seen, really seen, by the last person in the world she should have wanted to see her. I need you to type "he stayed" in the comments right now, and somebody needs to share this with their person who needs to hear this story. We are almost at the part that will absolutely wreck you. Keep watching. By morning, Kang Min-Jae knew who had ordered the hit. Oh Ji-hoon broke in under 2 hours. Not because of violence, but because of a simple and devastating conversation in which Kang Min-Jae laid out, with perfect calmness, exactly what Oh Ji-hoon's future looked like if he chose silence over truth. Oh Ji-hoon was many things. A man willing to die for Park Dae-jung was not one of them. The name at the top of the chain was not Park Dae-jung's. It was worse than Park Dae-jung. It was Madam Kang So-yeon, his aunt, the woman who had raised him after his parents died, the woman who had stood at his brother's funeral and held his hand and said, "You are all I have left." The woman who sat on the Kang organization's inner council as a ceremonial figurehead, or so everyone, including Kang Min-Jae, had believed. She was not a figurehead. She had been the quiet architect of the organization's direction for years, steering contracts, cultivating alliances, removing obstacles, all from a position of apparent grief and retirement, invisible in the way that women of a certain age in certain worlds are presumed to be invisible. She'd been working with Park Dae-jung since the beginning, not as his pawn, as his partner, and her goal was not power. She had all the power she needed. Her goal was legacy, a Kang-led organization that her son, Kang Min-Jae's cousin, would ultimately inherit. A succession plan that had been in motion for years and that required at its critical final stage the removal of Kang Min-Jae from the position he occupied. Amara had been the accelerant, an unexpected complication, a woman who had, against all probability, gotten close enough to Kang Min-Jae to change his behavior, change his focus, and threaten the carefully maintained isolation that made him manageable. She had to be removed, simply, cleanly, permanently. Kang Min-Jae sat with this information for 3 hours, alone, in the East Library at the window. When he came out, he was different. Not visibly. His face was the same controlled, still face it always was. His walk was the same measured, deliberate walk. But the people who had worked for him longest, Kim Tae-yang, the head of his real security rather than the estate's public-facing team, knew. The way animals know when the weather changes before the weather actually changes. He called a meeting of the inner council, all of them, including Madame Kang So-yeon, including Park Dae-jung. What he said at that meeting, the way he dismantled 11 years of Madame So-yeon's hidden architecture, piece by piece, calmly with documentary evidence he had assembled in those 3 hours through phone calls and data requests from financial records that only he had complete access to, was something that the council members who were there described, later and always in hushed tones, as the most terrifying thing they had ever witnessed, not because it was violent, because it was so utterly, completely, immovably calm, like watching a glacier move, like watching something that was always going to happen, finally happen. Park Dae-jung broke first, stood up, began to deny, began to reconstruct. "You have it wrong," he said. "Min-Jae, listen to me. This woman has made you—" "Sit down, Dae-jung." The voice carried no heat, which made it much worse. For a moment it looked as though Park intended to continue. His jaw tightened. His eyes moved around the room, measuring support, calculating odds. Then he saw the faces around the table and understood. The game was over. Slowly he sat down. Madame Kang So-yeon did not deny anything. She sat perfectly straight in her chair, her hands folded, and looked at her nephew across the council table with an expression that was almost proud. "You found it," she said. "I always wondered when you would." "You tried to kill her," he said, still calm, still terrifyingly calm. "I tried to remove a liability before it became a catastrophe," she said. "You are not a man who is allowed to fall in love, Min-Jae. Men in my position, he said, make their own decisions." She looked at him for a long time, and then, very quietly, she said the thing that cracked the council room open like a fault line. She said, "You still don't understand what happened to Jun Seo, do you?" she said quietly. "You spent 11 years asking the wrong questions." And in the silence that followed, something shifted behind Kang Min-Jae's eyes. Connections he had never made before suddenly aligned, missing pieces, contradictions, questions that had remained unanswered for 11 years. For the first time, he knew exactly where to start looking. Every absence suddenly mattered. Every contradiction demanded an answer. Every unanswered question about the night his 15-year-old brother had supposedly died in an accident now pointed in the same direction, and the calm shattered. 3 weeks passed. The Kang organization went through a restructuring that the business press described as a strategic reorganization, and that insiders understood as a complete and systematic dismantling of an 11-year shadow government that had operated inside it. Park Dae-jung was gone, not dead, because Kang Min-Jae was many things, but not his aunt, and killing former friends was not something he was willing to add to the ledger. Gone, in the sense that he no longer existed in any meaningful proximity to power, money, or freedom of movement. That was enough. Madame Kang So-yeon was a different story, and that story was between Kang Min-Jae and his conscience and the ghost of a 15-year-old boy who used to make star charts in a blue notebook, and it was not a story for other people. Amara had been told everything. Kang Min-Jae had sat across from her in the East Library. Her library, he had begun to think of it, the one room in the house that felt like it had a pulse, and told her everything. The organization, the betrayal, his brother, the truth about his aunt. He told her because she deserved to know, because she had nearly died in the middle of something she hadn't chosen, because he was tired, profoundly and bone deep, tired of a world in which information was used as a weapon and honesty was a tactical error. She had listened in silence. When he was finished, she was quiet for a long time. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "Not what do you need from me? Not what should I do? What do you want?" The question a person asks someone they see as fully real, fully human, fully capable of knowing their own answer. He looked at her across the desk. "I want," he said slowly, "to be a person that Jun Seo would have recognized. I've been something else for a very long time." She nodded. She looked at her hands. "I want to go home," she said quietly. "My father's company. There's enough evidence to prove what Kwame Asante did to him. I started collecting it before I ever left Ghana. I've been building the file piece by piece ever since. I almost have enough." "Show me what you have," Kang Min-Jae said. "Min-Jae, show me," he said, "not because I'm offering to fix it for you, because two people who know things about investigations should probably compare notes." She looked at him for a long time, this woman who had arrived at his estate 14 months ago with a degree in literature and a will made of something harder than iron and a way of existing in a room that made the room feel more real. And for the first time since she had arrived, she let herself look at him the way she had never allowed herself to look. Not at the power, not at the danger, not at the impossible distance between his world and hers, just at him. At the man who had sat up all night in a chair beside her bed. At the man who had said, "You are not furniture." At the man who was, against every reasonable expectation, trying to learn how to be the person his 15-year-old brother would have recognized. She pulled out her laptop. She opened the file she had been building for 2 years, and they sat together in the East Library until 2 in the morning, going through it. Not as employer and employee, not as a man with power and a woman without it, but as two people working toward the same thing from opposite ends of a long, difficult road. 6 months later, Joseph Osei stood in a courtroom in Accra. The case had already been under review for nearly a year before the final evidence surfaced. The case against Kwame Asante was built on evidence that included, mysteriously and without any verifiable source, a set of financial documents that proved beyond any reasonable doubt that the business partner Joseph had trusted had been stealing from the Osei company for 4 years before manufacturing the collapse. Joseph Osei was exonerated. Kwame Asante was not. Amara watched it on a live stream from Seoul, on her phone, sitting on the window seat of the East Library. Kang Min-Jae sat beside her. When the verdict was announced, when Joseph Osei turned to look at the camera with tears running down his face and said, in Twi, words that Amara whispered a translation of under her breath, she pressed her hand over her mouth and cried in the way you cry when something you've been holding for years finally releases. He didn't say anything. He didn't offer comfortable words because he was not a man who kept a supply of comfortable words. He simply put his hand over hers, that hand, the one that had never trembled, and held it. "My father wants to thank whoever helped," she said when she could speak. "He knows someone did. He doesn't know who." "He doesn't need to," Kang Min-Jae said. "Min-Jae." "Amara." She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. And the thing that passed between them in that moment was not the beginning of something, because it had begun a long time ago, in a library with books to dust and rain on the windows, and a man at a window who wasn't expecting to be seen. It was the acknowledgement of something, the naming of what had been growing in the dark for 14 months, quietly, without permission, without a plan, without any regard for the considerable and legitimate obstacles in its way. "I don't know how this works," he said. He stopped. "I'm not a simple man." "I know that," she said. "I'm not a simple woman. Your family is in Accra. My family is going to be fine," she said. "For the first time in 2 years, they're going to be fine." A pause. "I'd like to meet your father," Kang Min-Jae said. "Properly, if that's something you'd want." Amara Osei looked at the most feared man in South Korea, at the man who had carried her in his arms, who had sat up all night in a chair, who had dismantled a shadow government and exonerated her father, and still, in the middle of all of it, learned how to sit in a room and say, "Jun Seo used to love the stars." And she felt something so enormous and so quiet that she could not find a single word adequate enough to hold it. So she did the only thing that made sense. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his shoulder. And he, who had not been gentle with anything in 11 years, was very, very gentle. Later, much later, when the Seoul night was full and dark and the estate was finally, genuinely, peaceably quiet, Amara looked up at the sky through the East Library window. "Can you find Orion from here?" she asked. He looked up. He hadn't looked for it in 11 years. His eyes moved across the dark in the careful, methodical way of a man searching for something very specific. And then, quietly, he pointed. "There," he said. "He's there." She looked where he was pointing. 3 stars, clear and bright and very far away, and somehow, impossibly, exactly where they were supposed to be. She thought of a boy with a blue notebook and a taste for tangerine candy, who had sneaked out at midnight to find this exact constellation, this exact certainty that something vast and ancient and constant was up there regardless of what happened down here. She thought, "Jun Seo, your brother found his way back." She thought, "It took him a maid, a library, 14 months, 1 near-death experience, 1 catastrophic betrayal, and 1 late-night verdict live-streamed from Accra. But he found his way back. And somewhere in the city below them, in the soul that was indifferent and enormous, and full of stories it would never tell, the Kang Empire continued to turn, continued to be what it was, continued to require from Min-Jae the things that it had always required. That was not over. That was not simple. That would never, in any version of any future either of them could imagine, be without cost or complexity or danger. But at this window, at this hour, with his hand in hers and 3 stars in the right place above them, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was, against every expectation and against all the considerable odds of a world that had tried very hard to prevent it, everything. If this story moved you, if Amara and Min-Jae got into your chest the way they got into mine, then do these 3 things right now. Drop a comment, 1 word, 1 sentence, anything. Tell me what broke you. Subscribe. Because the next chapter of their story is coming and you do not want to miss it. And share this video with someone who needs to believe right now that the most unexpected person can be the one who saves you. I'll see you in the next one. Don't you dare leave without pressing that button.